Yeah, there does seem to be an inverse relationship between the amount we actually know about something and the certainty we're right about it. Right. And then the flip side of it, where it seems we get it wrong, is, well, the experts say, so we're just doing what the experts say. And like, well, that doesn't seem right either. And so I remember years ago seeing William F. Buckley interviewing a guy. This is all pre-internet stuff, about physician-assisted suicide. And Buckley's question was, well, what would Aristotle say about this? How would a Plato approach this topic, or Shakespeare? Where is this stuff like that? And the guy's like, yeah, I haven't read any of that stuff. And it was right. And that's basically what we all do today. Is that I don't actually need to know too much about it to have really solid formed opinions.
Oh my gosh. Oh, Charles, it's really hard. We would like to believe as believers that we are above the fray. We'd like to believe that we have an objectiveness. But the reality is, proxemics actually, I think, speaks more to our politics than anything else, not even more than social media. I say that in that I've seen tons. I've been here 9 years now planning a church. I've seen tons of guys come up here from Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Florida. And man, they have their twang, and they have they have red meat just dripping all over them. And they get up here and they see some of the oppressive systems, and they begin to have conversations. And I'm amazed at how their politics, their sociology, and much of their theology, I'm not saying it transforms. I'm saying it's hard to maintain some of the same strong views when you're not in the concrete material of relationship. And so as you know, our church is Southern Baptist. So I travel a lot to the South. And, you know, I've been speaking in classes, and I've had a guy lean over to me and be like, what do you think about that AOC? And at the time I didn't even know who she was. And I was like, I don't know. What is that? Is that like a policy or something? And come to find out, we went to the same high school. And then, you know, so I Googled it, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. I hope she gets saved. Like, what do you want me to do? So I think a lot of people would learn to get beyond some of the political fracturing by dwelling with people, by spending time with people. That helped me on the Republican side of things, being that I'm in the Northeast, spending time with hard bleeding Republicans, and, you know, and just kind of getting some of the heartbeat of how they think in honest conversations. Problem is getting them up here, you know, seeing my environment. And so my prayer is relationships can be built beyond it.
Yeah, it's a lot easier just to say, well, they're crazy and they're stupid, than actually find out, well, they just think they've had different experiences. They think differently about it, right?
Yeah.
But we tend to be pretty cloistered in our exposure to people who have very different experiences, it seems.
That's right. That's right.
And so, in 2 minutes left, what would be the key thing you want us to be hearing from you as it relates to making disciples?
Well, I do think, though we didn't broach this subject that much, I do think that justice is a new conversation that's been happening post George Floyd. Moreover, believers making that an issue that they get more involved in. But if I could be just so honest, the Black church has always been about justice, primarily because it had to be. It was forced to be. And so one of the things that I think we have to get better at and the Black church has had to become profound at it, is when we teach a text, we do not teach without a good understanding of context. We would never teach Romans without understanding Rome. We would never teach First Corinthians without understanding Aphrodite in Corinth. We would not teach about Ephesians without understanding Ephesus. So I think it is problematic that we spend so much time understanding the history of Corinth and not having a greater understanding of the history of America. there is a movement to try to edit out and Photoshop the bad parts of America. And I think for us to preach effectively and to preach a justice that Jesus would preach, then we have to understand, how were the suburbs made? How did we get to this place where why are so many Black people Democratic? How did that happen? Where, oh, the Republicans freed the slaves? Well, how did that happen? Where there's whole new narrative now? Like, all of that has to be understood beyond talking points, and that means that our seminaries have to have a better injection of civil rights in church history, and we've got to equip our leaders, particularly those that are going to be in the Northeast. You have to have a more profound understanding of how this country was made so that you can preach the text effectively to people.
And, James, you said something really important, because I hear both sides of it. One side of it is, hey, we're trying to whitewash slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, all of those things. The other side I hear is, all we ever talk about is what's wrong with the country. Mm-hmm. And so it seems to me like we're almost in a tale of two cities on it. Would you agree with that, or would you disagree?
Well, all we ever talk about is what's wrong with the country. I do think there is a challenge that we have ahead of us, and that is, I think many people are proud to live in this country. How did, in the 1960s, how did change happen? Was it because the church rose up, the white evangelical church rose up and said, you know what, y'all, we've been reading this text all wrong. We need to have Black folks in here, and that's not what happened. The government intervened. And what we saw happen in South Africa was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That is, there was this moment where there was a long conversation about what has happened. And honestly, one of the problems that we're always struggling with is Black people are the ones bringing up the tensions that they have in America, almost trying to convince their white counterparts. So yes, the tension is, we're talking about the problems, but it's actually not talking about the problems. It's actually trying to convince white men that there are problems. And I think that's where the tension lies, because at the end of the day, like, no one wants to live in another country. But there is a desire for an honest conversation about how things came into existence. Yeah. The last thing I'll say to that, Charles, is you probably have been in a relationship with someone who wants to be cool with you again. Hey, let's sit down and talk. But you're like, I have a tough time talking to you until we talk about the problem. And I need to have I was hurt to a level that I need a longer discussion than sorry. I need a more detailed discussion. And that's what it tends to feel like, where, my father was the first Black man to graduate from his college. So I'm not talking about ancient yesteryear kind of things. Yeah. And so the discussion sometimes is desired we want to move past it fast. Well, we just didn't move past Jim Crow fast. We didn't move past segregation fast. So we want a long, ugly history with a short apology or a short conversation. And I'm sorry, that just won't happen, and reconciliation be authentic.
Yeah, two things I've picked up since I've really started to focus on this over the last few years is we expect, let's get over civil rights. Look, it's over. Let's get over that, right? That period, Jim Crow. We don't say that about the Holocaust. And I'm not equating them, and I don't want anybody to mishear me, but we accept that is still with us and will be with us, and it will take a long time. I think we need to do that with Jim Crow. The example I used for a while was that I taught my children how to handle money. Mm-hmm. And I taught them how to handle money the way my parents taught me how to handle money. And my parents were children of the Depression. So I handled money a certain way as a result of that. My children have nothing to do with the Depression, and yet they handle money like they had something to do with the Depression.
Right.
And you know it's going to come again, so you better be saving, right? I hear my parents saying that in my head, and that's 4 generations, 3-4 generations later, the Depression is still with us.
Amen.
And so we're fooling ourselves if we think Jim Crow's not still with us and slavery is still with us. There's a way in which our history is always with us.
Yes.
So I'm going to soapbox. I don't mean to. Sorry, I want to talk to you.
I think that's very eloquent, and what I encourage a lot of my counterparts to do is, I understand that I've talked about race an infinite amount of times more than a lot of my white brothers and sisters, in the home that they brought up in. I get that. And so what I encourage them to do is just begin to learn history. I mean, I think that's one of the basic steps that we have to have in order to capture effective preaching in the area of justice.
Yeah, I heard, I can't remember who I heard say this, but I thought it was a really good point, is most of our understanding of civil rights is a chapter in high school and snippets.
That's right.
And until we get that whole narrative put together, we're missing a lot. And so what would you point someone to who said, hey, you know what, that's a good point. I want to understand the history of civil rights. What would you point people to?
I think I hate this whole CRT conversation because it really has stunted the growth of people. Like, I've been on some CRT websites, like these hunters, these conservative hunters of the progressive drift. And I'm like, wow, I went to Dallas Theological Seminary. I went to Southeast. You found me. I could show you. Now I can show you. I'm in New York. I can show you progressive. It just like it's tripping me out. But I say that because I think Dr. Jamar Tisby has really been stunted in his ability to effectively speak. But I think this is what his heartbeat was in creating the book Color or Compromise, in that he's trying to show a long journey from, particularly starting in Jim Crow, of how our country has gotten to this place. Moreover, how the church became such a divided space. So that's just a great book, and they got videos on Amazon Prime. I mean, it's right there for us to learn. So I struggle. I'm saddened. And I knew Jamar years ago when he was at Reformed Theological Seminary, and he had Reformed African American Network, and he was trying to get Black folks reformed. And I've seen his entire journey. So I think it makes sense for us to sit and humbly say, this is a man who has been through all of a Presbyterian. He has been through the most pristine, pure theology you can find. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he's biblically astute, but he's historically effective. And I think we have to submit ourselves to that.
Yeah, that first part of the Color of Compromise I thought was quite helpful in laying out that narrative. The other one that I thought was helpful, I went back and read Uncle Tom's Cabin. I probably was supposed to read it in high school, but I don't know about you, but I didn't read everything I was supposed to read in high school. But I went back and read it, and it makes you angry in a way that we ought to be angry over injustice. I thought Taylor Branch's trilogy about the civil rights movement was particularly helpful. He's got 3 books starts before, walking into the start of the civil rights, and then, of course, the Martin Luther King phase, and then, of course, what happened afterwards. That was pretty helpful. You skipped over, though, I think, a really important point when you said the government stepped in. The government stepped in because the Black church, predominantly, right? White churches were involved, but it was predominantly the Black church, although not all of the Black church, for a whole bunch of different reasons, were the ones that put into our face the injustice.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And they did it by not being violent.
Right.
And because then, right, when people are just being attacked, that's hard for Americans to watch, even with the biases of the time and things like that. It, it, it we don't seem to be approaching it that way today. And so, and I'm not sure there's a movement out there, but it doesn't seem, as even Black leaders have said to me, it doesn't seem designed to make actual progress.
Well, I don't think the Black church is at the tip of the spear anymore.
Okay.
Nonviolence was the methodology of Christian leadership. But now you have a progressive liberal leadership that's Black. You know, it's definitely Black. But I would also say, though, you know, in terms of Black Lives Matter and things of that nature, I would also say, though, that the majority of protesting that you're seeing is nonviolent. I think, though, because we live in an information age, it is obviously much easier for us to remember the looting and rioting, kind of the powder keg, explosive moments that have happened. But I think at the end of the day, like, the church is involved, but no longer the foremost and primary voices. And so we've got to allow people to, I don't agree with, you know, looting and rioting, but I also know that I'm not the one leading the charge all the time.
Yeah. I've heard from African American leaders the same point you were making of, it does feel like I'm always trying to convince white people that there's a problem here. Yeah. And you've got a little bit of there's issue around that. Some will say it's just exhausting and I'm tired of doing that. You'll have other people say, I'm done doing that. I just want action. We've been trying to talk about this forever. I just want action. Of course, if we don't all agree on what the problem is, we can't get to action. So how do we deal with that kind of mess of, right, tired of talking about it, want action, but you're not going to get action until we all agree on it, which means we have to talk about it. And then some would say, and we've been talking about for 30 years, we didn't get there. What's the point?
Well, I think soon and very soon, we are going to go the way, justice is going to go the way of kind of the charismatic conversation, where when I was younger, charismatics were like demon possessed, right? Like there was kind of this conservative, there, you know, you had your continuationists and your cessationists, and there was a real divide. And over time, I found that there was kind of this peaceful understanding of, I never had that experience. I don't understand what you're talking about. And then there are people who are like, well, I've been touched by the Holy Ghost. And I just think right now we're in this moment where, because I also believe that there's a lot of Black folks who honestly don't buy into a justice ethic. They live in Mesquite, Texas. They go to a diverse megachurch. The church never talks about justice. They have a good job at Cisco. Their kids go to a high school, and they're fine without talking about justice because their lives are doing well. They worked hard. You know, the guy used to be in the military. He's a sergeant. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen a lot of the Black bourgeoisie move away from this conversation and try to assimilate into American culture. I think you're going to see that, and I think this is going to be much more of a theological issue than a color-based issue or culture-based issue. I think this is going to just be a divide on how do we express justice through the Word of God and through our methodology. So, in addition to that, I am one of those people who, I had been a part of racial reconciliation this, racial reconciliation that. I just was amazed at all these conversations. But what I ultimately could not convince my white counterparts was, you have on this continuum Black people are in the situation they're in because there are character deficits. Father figures are not in the home, jail, music. It's a character problem. Personal decisions are being made based out of character. Then you have the far right where it's like, man, the white man, the systems of the white man, right? So you have these
The
this
left, on the left.
yeah. And so when you look at this divide, it's like, well, do you believe that everything happening in the Black community is based upon purely character? Well, not really. Okay, so you're a little bit over here then. So let's have that conversation. And what I have found is that people naturally kind of gravitate to these polar spaces when none of us, I think, actually believe that. I don't think any Black person working in the hardcore element of Brooklyn or any urban aspect of America thinks that policies and systems are the only problem. And I don't think any white person in Alabama thinks every problem in the Black community is based upon character. But our conversation bleeds into these extremely polarizing depths. And so we're not able to have detailed, honest conversations. And our media wants it that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. The extremes dominate everything in our culture today. And
Yes.
it seems to me that there's a place for the church to step into the middle. And that's what we're trying to do with some of what we do on the Church in Action, in fact. I also wonder sometimes, I'd love your thought on this, is we spend a lot of time trying to debating about, is there an issue? What's the cause of the issue? Just like you're saying, and I agree exactly with what you just said, but what's the cause of the issue? And is there structural racism? Is there not structural racism? And it would seem to me that the church could easily get their heads around, white evangelicals, Black evangelicals, take your pick. Education is fundamentally broken in this country. And it holds back all children, but disproportionately Black and Latino children. And so let's go fix education.
Yes.
And it seems to me that we spend so much time debating the issue, we never get to, okay, well, could we actually do something for you? You don't have to agree with me there's structural racism. Let's just agree we need to fix education.
Well, and this is the question that I ask people. When I say, okay, is it all policy? Is it all personality and culture? Okay, it's personality and culture. The reason why education is bad is because the moms don't come to the PTA meeting. Okay. Do you care? Now that you have the answer you think, and you say at your kitchen table, and you say in your deacons meetings, okay, now what does the church on mission do? Even if that was the case, what solution could we create? And what I have found is that a lot of their reasoning really circles back to Black people need to fix their own problems. That's really when you really dig underneath those issues, that's kind of the essence of their theology.
Yeah.
Which we would do, which we don't have that perspective in any kind of missional sense.
Yeah. It's a very American mindset, and I'm not anti-American by any stretch of the imagination, but it is take care of yourself. But that's not necessarily a Christian mindset of helping people who are struggling.
That's right.
And I'm trying to remember whose book I just read, but they were like, could the church just teach kids to read? And they said that the prison system uses 4th grade reading levels to predict prison capacity.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So how about we just teach kids to read? Right. And now you get a debate about phonics, and they actually got into that. And we taught our kids with phonics. But let's have a multi-ethnic, multiracial dialogue about how do we help kids read? Let's just do that. Right.
Yeah.
And we don't seem to be able to get there, but there's an awful lot of energy just debating stuff that doesn't add to anything.
Yeah. Well, and Charles, if you live next door to a family that, the son gets arrested, but you see the dad and you can tell the dad has poor character, there's a level of compassion you won't have, because you're like, see, I see the problem. The problem is that, like you'll be less involved because you feel like this is because really, ultimately, those that don't believe in systemic racism believe in a systemic family problem, and they ultimately talk about family. When you really dig underneath, you hear a lot about the dad's not in the home. These kids need to get back together. The moms are out here on welfare. Like you hear family as the primary structure, and I'm all for family. I really am, but there are tremendous issues for folks who still have a family intact, right? Who deal with some of the way that our culture does not allow Black men to advance. So, I've realized that it's a discussion that not everybody wants to have, and so I'm going to try to keep my energy in the right place.
It's reminding me of my pastor, Clive Calver, who some people remember from running the Evangelical Alliance in the UK and World Relief in the US. And he was a speaker at Congress, which is something Vision New England used to do. He would say that evangelicals like nothing more than to disagree about something, because then they can fight instead of going to tell people about Jesus.
And that's really, that is a profound statement. That is, at core, I do think people want to fight for and to argue, because action is humbling, very humbling. It's hard. I run Pray March Act, man. It's hard. Yeah. It's challenging. Learning the policies, doing the research, doing the work. It's much more challenging than assuming I understand all the problems of a community.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, James, this has been such a blessing of a conversation for me, and thank you for giving a lot more time than we originally asked you for to do it. Thanks so much.
It's been an honor.
Thanks. And I'd also like to thank our producer, Jessica Mangano. I'd like to thank our listeners. We hope this discussion helps us be the people of God, doing the work of God to transform lives. You can find more resources and past episodes at visionnewengland.org, and you can help us accelerate evangelism in New England by clicking on Donate. Our program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.